All right. I called this a long time ago when I was making classic errors, avoiding classic errors, but there's a bit more to it than that. So um, let's see what we can put together in this. That is that lovely coloured thing is the old warhorse that I used to fly. I bought a share in that from Alan Cassidy a long time ago, and toted it around various international championships. I couldn't possibly tell you what it was called because that probably wouldn't be very polite. But it's the Yak 55M, a short wing Yak 55M. So welcome to all of you. This chat session is for pilots, obviously, because I hope there's a good deal of advice in it for all of you before you go flying in a competition again. And it's for judges. This is a free discussion. If you want to ask any questions on the way through, then please do ask away. The URL at the bottom of the screen is where you will find a page where you can download this stuff from. So then I can, no, there's not an easy way that I can do that for you. So I'll rely on you to make sure that you can write that down. So ancient history, just to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's. I had a Pitts a long time ago. Loved my Pitts like everybody does. It was an old S1C with some funny wings on it, only on 180 with a fixed pitch prop. And it yowled around the sky like Pittses do. Hugely enjoyed that. And then I bought into the Yak 55 group that was at White Waltham at the time. So the picture at the bottom right hand corner is us in Kansas in 1997. So you can see from the bloke on the left, it's not very short, and that's the one that fitted into the pitch, so it's all a bit of a squeeze. But that was us, and that was the first international I did, which was very good fun. On the way back, I stopped at a place called Karlovy Vary, and there was a Yak 44. There were 44 or 42. Anyway, that jet airliner is a Yak 2, so a pair of Yaks. All good fun. Right, now this is what this is all about. There are two groups of people at every event that we run, domestic and international. Most of you think about piloting, flying, the marks you get, lunch, and all the other bits and pieces of social interaction that go on at the events. But there really are two very separate groups of people at each event. You guys, the pilots, you do all the hard work, of course, and we sit and watch you. There's a bunch of judges that disappear off into the corner of the aerodrome and come back with brown on one side of their face and not on the other. And they do a lot of hard work. At internationals, the judging panel is almost 20 people, judges and assistants and the chief judge, and you spend 8 or 9 days not having very much to do with the pilots except in the evening. But it's a completely separate group, and it's very good fun. If you've only flown and not been there for the judging line, then you're probably going to have a very high opinion of the judges, unless you've got some extremely good marks. But we do have a good time. We're all very passionate, and we like it there a lot. You can't have an event without judges, and of course you can't have an event without pilots. So the two go together as a kind of a match pair. So let's talk about pilocy stuff for a little while, shall we? We have some wonderful events in Great Britain and have had for a very, very long time. And long may it go on, apart from this idiotic COVID problem, which has held us up. But maybe at the end of June we'll start going again, so we can start to see this passionate sport of ours in play. David Thompson at the left side there, doing his thing with his dark glasses. The guys with Sierra Charlie at CIVA, I think, at the World Advanced Aerobatic Championship 2 or 3 years ago. Chris, you're in there. Paul Bryce, we haven't seen for a while. Phil, and so on. John Vy's at the top getting into his bits. This sport is just full of lovely photographs and pictures, and isn't it fun? So, pilots, let's talk about some things. What I'm going to go through are, in general, those topics. So, training and critique, which is the really big thing that occupies everybody for most of the time, except the competitions. And then preparation on the day, which is hugely important. Sequence cards, we'll go through that in detail in a minute. Learning the sequence. Tom Cassell talked a bit about that in his last chat. That's quite difficult to do. I found it always very difficult, so I used to rely on the sequence card on the instrument panel, so that was important to me. Warm-up figures and flying the box. A lot of people in aerobatics, they just get in the airplane and fly not very structurally in the box before they get to their sequence. And what I can certainly tell you is that on the judging line, because we have to watch the airplane as soon as it gets off the ground to see that you're all behaving in a sensible fashion, that period before you dive into the box, wing rocking, is quite important to us because it gives us a good idea of what you're going to fly like, how sensible you're going to be, and it sets up an expectation on the judging line that is quite important to us. Wing rocks and starting the sequence, you go through quickly and then flying the figures in the right place. A lot of people find that very difficult. Giving the judges answers and not questions is one of my themes, and we'll come back to that quite a bit over the next few slides. Concentrating on every part of every figure is quite difficult. One tends to scramble through a sequence unless you're very relaxed and have prepared very well. And so having the time and the concentration to do this is extremely important. And then we'll talk a little bit about classic errors that we see over and over again on the judging line. And I don't just mean in domestic events, we see them at internationals as well. So if you can remember some of these and recognize them, then be happy because they occur all over the place. So preparation on the day. On the ground, there are a number of things that are completely free. That old wise tale about the Mac in the clubhouse and Abcas in the Bowser when you've gone flying. This is a bit like that. We have a briefing, so you get the runway, the frequencies, and the wind, and that sort of thing, judge location. You can go online and look at a picture of where the box is going to be. That's quite important, and you should print that and carry it around with you. You need to learn the sequence very thoroughly, and that's not an easy thing to do. There are some tips that we'll go through in a minute that will help you with that. It's a bit like college cramming, but you have to do it. Food and eating for energy. A bit of a boring topic, but you need to make sure that your stomach and your digestive system is working well. It doesn't really get in the way very much, but if it does, it's something that you can control quite easily for no cost, so you need to do it. And drink, and I do mean non-alcoholic. Hydration is critically important, and you need to pay quite careful attention to how well your body's running before you get to get in the aeroplane. Exercise, there's one that most people wouldn't think of. There's a very interesting article in the IAC magazine of March and April. If you can get to that, I'll try and put the link up to that later on, from Francois Leveau, and he talks about exercise and in particular getting your body well oxygenated before you go flying, because the mental strife that you're going to go through in those 5 minutes in the air take a lot of oxygen, and you start off with a tank full of it in your body, and when it's gone, and then it's very hard to make your mind up about anything. Going to the loo, of course, you need to do that before you go up. Notes on a sequence card. I'll talk about sequence cards in a minute. and obvious things like airplane fuel, loose objects, and so on. All that is free. You might have to pay for your lunch, but really, all that stuff you can do in your own time, and you need to get your act together and get it done, and it doesn't cost you anything. But as soon as you walk out to the airplane to get in and go, now everything starts to cost you, and it costs you in all sorts of ways. So getting in and getting strapped up and tight and comfortable, you'll have done that lots of times, hugely important. Timing your startup. We see people fire up their airplanes and then taxi out to the departure point and then sit there for 5-10 minutes. And when you start the airplane up and start taxiing out, there's an adrenaline curve that winds up in your body. And if you're not careful, that adrenaline curve will kind of go flat and start coasting down the other side. So don't start it too early. Try and time it so that you're taxiing out only a few minutes before you need to go. And once you're in the air, of course, radio, making contact with the chief judge is the last thing. And if you don't do that correctly, that can be very costly because you can have all your hard work taken away from you and you won't like that at all. Sequence cards, let me talk about those for a minute. This lovely picture on the right-hand side is a card that was put together by somebody who's working in Spain at the moment, probably not in the crowd here. I used to spend a lot of time on my sequence cards and put a coloured overlay on the interwing parts and then make very brightly coloured notes in all sorts of places so that when my mind went completely blank in the airplane, I could look at the sequence card and try and pick up what it is that I'm supposed to do. So from the software that we have, we print little sequence cards. They're really tiny. It's a very good idea to make the sequence card holder on your instrument panel as big as you can make it. Obviously, you don't want to cover up any instruments, but the bigger the card, the more you can see. It's always very difficult looking from the bright outside to the dim inside of the cockpit, but a bigger card with clear markings and additions to it can be read. So use bright colours, add important instructions. You will know which way the wind is going to go and which way you want to draw your card, left wind or right wind. Most people do it with the wind in that direction as shown. When you've got your little sequence card from registration from Jen or whoever provides them, my advice to you is not necessarily to use that card, but to go away and sit in a corner and redraw it by hand. And the act of redrawing it and making it neat and tidy and making mistakes and all that sort of thing will lodge the sequence in your head quite well. It's well worth doing. And lastly, it's really a good idea to put what I call gate height info on the card. You should be able to work out where the low points in your sequence are, and they should be comfortably above the low limit that you're allowed to fly to. So if you mark on the sequence card where the lowest part of your sequence is and any gate height info, in other words, if you've got a complicated set of rolls and then a half loop downwards, you could write on the level you need to be at. Otherwise, you are going to have to make a very small half loop and so on. And this is all stuff that you do on the ground, and it's all free. And so do it before you get in the airplane and make sure that you've done it very carefully. Once you get into the airplane, there is no time to think or replan this stuff. You might think that when you're in the airplane, you can actually have a logical discussion with yourself. But believe me, as the sequence goes on, that gets very hard to do. And by the time you're near the end of the sequence, actual thinking ability is in pretty short supply. So learning the sequence, how should you do that? I suggest that you go away and sit in the corner and get away from all your mates and all the noise and cups of coffee and so on, and you quietly memorize it from your card. One of Tom's neat little pieces of advice was, when you think you know it, go through it as fast as you can, and you'll stop somewhere because you can't remember the next figure. So sort it out, look at the card, sort it out, and then start again. Go through it faster and faster and faster. And if there's anywhere you hesitate, that's where you won't be able to remember it in the end. You can get a picture of the box. All the competitions that we run, there's a box picture on the website that you can download. Good old Mr. Google does it when the crops are nice and bright and green, so probably what you see won't be the same colour and shape and size that's on the photograph. But nevertheless, it does tell you where most things are, and it's a good idea to have in your head a very clear impression of where things are around the box. See a lot of people at competitions moving their hands around. We call it hand walking, don't we? I did a lot of that too. I don't think that hand walking is actually much like what you do in the aeroplane. It's very comforting to be able to walk around the ground behind the hangar and wave your arms around and make noises and imagine yourself flying the sequence. But inside the airplane, it's a bit different. Apart, obviously, from being very noisy and having your hands on the stick and the rudder pedals and so on, the environment's different. So just be aware that hand walking is a good idea, but it doesn't actually replicate what happens in the airplane at the time. Make yourself a plan as to where you want to locate every figure. I know this all sounds a bit detailed, but even if you don't remember it too much in the airplane, the whole business of going through the sequence and idealizing where you're going to put the figures will make a lot of difference to the preparation before you get in the airplane. Gauge heights I talked about, target speeds perhaps you might want to put on there. Low points in the sequence, important. You need to be aware where the low bits of the sequence are going to be, because they'll make a lot of difference to how you approach them. Cross-box directions. It's quite often people decide whether they're going to turn left or right in figures with quarter and three-quarter rolls up and down, and that sort of thing. Left and right is not really a very good idea. It's a good idea to put same and opposite on pairs of rolls. If you need to make a decision about whether to turn towards the judges or not, then use the words towards or away, because you should know where the judges are when you're flying. And towards is a bit more obvious. So we'll come back to this in a minute. I'm back to what we said in the last slide now. Try and recite the sequence backwards. I know you'll laugh, and this is all idiotic and so on, but the more you do these odd things, the better you'll learn the order that the figures go in. And if you can recite the sequence backwards or start halfway through it, then you will be in a better place than otherwise. It goes without saying that you need to be really clear about every part of every figure. Even at unlimited level, I have talked to unlimited pilots and discovered that they don't actually know what the judges are looking for. So you need to be really clear about every part of every figure, so that it's a fairly natural thing to do. And at that stage, if you're running into problems, then ask. The judges may have disappeared by that time, but there'll always be somebody about who can help you. Ask one of your mates. They probably won't give you a bum steer, but ask if you're unsure about anything. You need to know exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Now, multitasking. All sorts of people say all sorts of silly things about multitasking, and I'm not going to suggest that 1/6 is better than the other at it. That's an old tale. But this is a bit like instrument flying. Those of you who have done any instrument flying, gone down that route at all, there are 6 identifiable channels that you have to keep running, 6 balls you have to keep in the air when you're flying a sequence. You have to fly the airplane and all the boring normal things like speed, height, attitude, T's and P's, revs and so on. You need to be able to run that almost in a side part of your mind. You have to fly every single part of the figure you're in very carefully. There's a great tendency to start a figure and look ahead all the time and not really think about the bit you're actually doing. So slow down and think about the bit you're actually doing and get it right. When you're training and when you haven't got the pressure of competition on you, you can always get this sort of thing right, but you will be in a hurry when you're doing this, and you will not have a clear head. So you need to think about flying every single part of every figure as carefully as you can. Third thing is you need to know what the next figure is. It's hopeless coming out of the figure and going, oh, what's next? And having to look at the card and then goes along straight and level, possibly upside down, trying to work out what's coming next. So the next figure is something that you need to have in your head. I always used to read the figure on the card and then at least say to myself, what comes next is a quarter vertical or half loop down or what have you. So you've got the major thing, the major basic element stuck in your head. Number 4, after each figure, you need to look at the ground and see where you are. You need to find out where you are in relation to the box. It's a difficult habit to learn that. You can do it most comfortably when you're chuntering upwards in verticals and downwards in verticals, as long as you aren't thinking about rolling too much. P loops, going over the top of P loops, going over the top of loops, those sorts of relatively calm moments are when you need to look at where the box is and how you're doing. And almost inevitably, you'll find you aren't quite where you think you want to be. So when you pull back down to the vertical or push or whatever it is, you've got to start thinking about squeezing on the rudder pedal to move yourself back into the middle of the box. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all those things are going on all the time you're flying, and you have to have another little space in your head to monitor actually how you're doing, because if you're not careful, and perhaps even if you are, you'll get to a stage in the sequence and go, hey, hang on a minute, this is going in the wrong direction, or I should be upside down, or something like that. So you need a separate channel in your head to monitor what's going on. And then, unfortunately, if you detect something, you're going to have to make a plan to do something about it. And that's jolly hard to do. Your mental and physical workload is going to be extremely high. That's what we all love this stuff for. And you won't have any time to think. So, right, done all that. And you've got in the airplane and you're driving around, and the chief judge has said, yes, the box is clear for you, and you've had that exchange. Make sure that you do have that exchange with the chief judge. People who fall out of that habit, unfortunately, end up in trouble with the chief judge, and it doesn't work. So now, when you get up in the air, it's easy to think there's an awful lot of pressure to get on with it, but it's your show, you're flying, it's your time. Slow down, relax, and start to put your act together to prepare for what you're going to have to do. So the first thing I suggest you do is you fly around all 4 sides of the box. If you're down at the base of life in club and maybe sports, you might have a slowish aeroplane, and that might take a little while, but we'll wait for you on the ground. That's not a problem. But I do suggest you fly around all 4 sides of the box and work out where you are, what the box looks like, and so on. And whilst you're doing it, get yourself a very good impression of where the judges are. Sometimes it's quite hard to see them. Usually we try and put an orange marker out on the ground, but we don't always manage to do that. But it's the judges you're playing to. All of the time and preparation and money and all the rest of it that got you to this point in the air is all about showing those people on the ground what you can do and how well you can do it. So make sure you can see the judges. Now, you really left practice behind, but I have to say a lot of people don't use the warm-up figures in the way that they can. This becomes a bit different in advanced and limited at free knowns where you can practice some of it, but let's just think about ordinary sequences. You can treat your warm-up figures as proper practice, and you should do that. And if you do that in front of the judges, they will pay attention, and that will have an impression on them. You have to get them right, of course, don't get them wrong. But look, when you fly around the box and you've got one side of the box and turn into it, instead of just doing a 10 or 20 or 30 degree angle downwards, slide downwards to pick up a bit of speed, make it a proper 45-degree down. It's an aerobatic figure and you're allowed to do it. So poke the nose down to 45 and fly down to your start height and then pull level and check the speed. That's the speed that you would want to start your first figure at. So you can practice running into the box and starting your first figure, getting into the right place and at the right speed and at the right height to fly your first figure. You are allowed to do 2 half rolls. So make sure that you fly them accurately. Don't hurry them. They're practice half rolls. They're a 1.1.1 and 2 half rolls is a complete aerobatic figure. So you're allowed to do that. So do it and think about it accurately. Most of you are allowed to fly a humpty. Do it in the middle of the box. And whilst you're doing the humpty, pull up the vertical and then look over your shoulder and make sure you can see where the judges are. And then as you pull over the top, make sure that your wings level and so on. And when you get to the down line, look at the judges again and get comfortable with where they are and fix them in your head. When you put over the humpty, you can fly another 45-degree line to get back up to your start height. So you've had 2 45s, 2 half rolls and humpty. It's a good deal of practice, and just doing them casually and without any accuracy not only doesn't really help you very much, but gets you into the habit of doing stuff like that. And you shouldn't do it. You should be, what can I say, as military as you can be. You should be as careful and make this whole thing as productive as you can be. So you go back to your start position, get round to where you want to turn into the box, have a proper relax, count to 5, whatever you like, put the nose down, and then wing rocks. You can have 3 wing rocks, and instead of doing little wobbles, make sure they're all at 90 degrees. Here you are with 6 quarter rolls to practice before you run in and start your first figure. So you have a lot of opportunities to practice, and I'm constantly amazed at the number of people who treat this in a very lightweight, casual fashion and don't use it to best advantage. It really works. Worked for me, and it can work for you. It's not to say that I didn't make lots of mistakes, because I did, but there you go. We all made those. This is all about minimizing mistakes and getting your head into the right place. And lastly, if it goes wrong, and it does from time to time, take a break. And that means that on the ground, you need to think about what a break's going to cost you and how to use it. If you take a break, don't rush around and start again. Just take a minute or 2 to set yourself down, wing rocks, go away, come back, wing rocks, and restart all over again. It's really worth it. So from the moment you enter the box, you need to make it neat and tidy. And as I said, the judges do watch your warm-up figures. They get their first impression from you. Make sure you start the first figure in the right place, the right height, right speed, and so on. Look at where the judges are between every figure and try and proceed at a kind of regular pace. And don't fly long distances between the figures if you can help it. You might get blown downwind and you have to come back a bit, but try to make your figures at a regular pace, unless you have to reposition. Wing rocks, we've been through 3 wing rocks. You can start them outside the box, you can start them inside the box. If you want to start your first figure in the middle of the box, it probably pays to start the wing rocks, put the nose down outside the box. You can do 1 wing rock in the 45 and then 2 on the level, or 3 on the 45, or whatever you like. I suggest the most useful thing is to do 2 wing rocks on the 45, one towards the judges, one away from the judges, and then pull level, and then fly your last wing rock towards the judges so that you can have a quick peek at where they are, and then off you go. Lots and lots of practice before you need to actually start flying the sequence. Concentrate on every part of every figure. Very easy to scramble along and think ahead to 2 or 3 kind of maneuvers later in the figure. So make sure you start first figure in the right place. Look for the judges, proceed at a regular pace, think, check your location, and know what the next figure is going to be. If you don't know the whole of the next figure, if it's complicated, at least know roughly what you've got to do, so that if it's a half cut, at least you can just pull the stick and then get into it and check the card to see what it is. Now, let me just make sure that you all clearly understand what drives the judges. There's a saying that we put to judges all the time, particularly at internationals, and that is judge what you see. One of the real problems in judging, and it's hard to get away from, is there's a lot of expectation in what the pilot's going to do. And so the judge has to think very carefully and concentrate on what they actually see, and then mark what they actually see. So it's really important that you fly the aeroplane to provide the best presentation to those people on the ground. Call them what you like. They give you good marks, they're nice people. If they don't, maybe they're idiots and they didn't really see what you were doing. But they're the people who matter. All of the time, money, effort, preparation, and everything you do up to the point where you actually start flying the sequence is aimed at making those people on the ground give you as near to 10s as you can get all the way through. A lot of people particularly with very sexy modern airplanes, they tend to pull very high G and do very sharp corners. Judges don't care. If you give yourself 10G square corners all the time, we don't give anything on the ground. That's fine, they're nice looking corners, but so what? All we're looking for is whether they're a good radius and the radius stays the same. If you pull lots and lots and lots of G, that's the sharp corner thing. We don't really care about it at all. Some people seem to think that it's very important to impress their mates in the clubhouse, but they don't give you the marks. It's only that little bunch of people on the ground. So keep it all in front of the judges. And now I'm back to my little byline. Give them answers, not questions. And what I mean by that is don't make them think, make them question what you're doing. If you fly neatly and tidily and do it in a regular fashion, they will have to seek and really look for things that they don't like. And they don't want to do that. So what you want to do is to give those people on the ground, fat, dumb, lazy people, you want to give them an easy time. So give them answers, make it look nice. Don't do things that make them, say, hey, what's going on? Ooh, question. So give it smooth and tidy. Don't make the figures too big. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when all the lovely new extras started coming onto the scene, people loved doing 3,000-foot verticals because it was great fun doing them. And we used to sit on the ground and go, oh, not another one. It just is boring, not impressive. And finally, the big no-no for judges is don't get low. If you start getting low near the bottom of the box, you start giving the judge a question that they have to answer all the time, and it'll divert them from looking at your figures and marking them. If you get low, take a break. You really should do it. So classic errors, what do we see all too often that make us roll our eyes and so on? Corners to verticals, looping radii. It's very, very helpful to judges if we can tell when the corner starts, when the looping bit starts, and when it finishes. And what we see quite a lot of is the pilot in the airplane slowly pulls the stick back and the G mounts in the airplane. And so you get a shape like the first one, top left there with the question mark. And then towards the end of the arc, the airplane tends to dig in a little bit because the prop blast over the elevators gets more dominant as the speed drops off. So you don't get a radius at all. And what we want to see is a clear arc in each radius with a well-defined start and a well-defined finish. When we were all flying Pixies back in the good old days, we used to talk about popping the stick. And in a Pits, because it's quite hard to judge and it's quite hard to tell when the attitude changes, it was quite important to actually pop the stick backwards before you started the pulling, and then pop it forwards again when you got to the end, and actually kind of wriggle the airplane in pitch to say to the judge, this is where it starts and this is where it ends. You don't need to do that in a monoplane because that shows, but you need to have it in your mind that it's instant stick back and then instant stick back into the neutral position at the start and finish of the radii. If you've got a looping figure, most of the more powerful airplanes, this doesn't matter so much, but in the lower pad airplanes, particularly draggy Pixies and that sort of thing, people tend to draw half Cubans loops and half Cubans too big. So what you see on the right-hand side there is a nice arc that's gone up to the vertical but ran out of steam. And then, although you don't notice in the airplane, the radius gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you kind of fall off the top and then coast down the 45. So try to go as fast as you can into the first part of the loop, and then back off the stick at the top, float over the top. Knife edge rudder. This is something that's very obvious in the judging line. If you see somebody fly a 4-point roll like that, it's fairly natural to fly the first quarter roll into knife and then put some pressure on the top rudder pedal so the airplane's nose goes up, and something in your head says, well, it'll kind of carry on flying level if I do this, so it's the right thing to do. And then you go upside down, and then in the third quarter you do the same thing. But what actually happens is that when you get into knife and you apply enough rudder pedal to push the nose upwards, genuinely upwards, almost always you don't get the rudder pedal off in the second quarter roll, and the whole plot departs axis in a direction by a few degrees. And then you do it again the second time, and lo and behold, when you finish the 4-point roll, you find you're 10 or 15 degrees off axis. Excuse me. Very easy to do. The bottom diagram shows what from the judging line appears to be much easier, and that's only put on enough top rudder to keep the nose level. Now you know and I know that if you fly for any more than a few milliseconds in knife, the airplane will start to fall. It falls at the same speed as a stone falls. But we can't see that from the judging line. You're not trading spokes, it doesn't show. And that bottom diagram with just enough top rudder to keep the nose level looks nicer, and it's neat and tidy. Doing it the way in the top diagram gives the judge a question. The judge has to say to him or herself, ooh, what's going on? Is the airplane flying straight? Am I going to take any marks off? Am I going to downgrade it? Whereas a neatly made 4-point roll like the bottom diagram won't ask any questions, and the judge then at the end of the figure has to sit there and think, what did I see that wasn't right? Do I need to take anything off? That's a whole different thing. This applies more obviously when you have 45 up. 45 up with a 2 or 4 like that. A half flick is something that has the same sort of effect. But a 45 up with a 2 or 4 and top rudder applied will get the airplane off axis and will get a downgrade, and puts this question into the judge's mind. So the bottom diagram is the neat way to do it. Most of our competitions don't take place in a cloudless sky, so it's a good idea to pull to 45 and then fix the airplane's nose on a point in the cloud and then roll into knife and hold that angle exactly to make it neat and tidy, and then do the second part. It takes a little bit of care on the rudder pedals, but it's better, and the judge will sit there and won't necessarily think of a downgrade. Second line up, in the top diagram, 2 or 4 on, it's a reverse cubit, isn't it? I think, whatever it is, don't cut me down. Length A before the roll has got to be the same as the length B. And so it doesn't pay to drive length A up very far. And then when you roll, the length B will still be done at a reasonable speed. So if you get those 2 lengths the same and then draw a nice arc like that, there really isn't anything to downgrade, and it's a mean judge that tries to take anything off you. But if you draw a long line, as at the bottom, and then find you're running out of speed and you have to draw a shorter line, and then unbeknown to you, when you pull the stick back, the radius is much tighter. Quite easily, you'll find that you get a 2-to-1 downgrade on the rolls, and because there's a small radius at the top, you'll get a 2-point downgrade for that as well. So you almost designing a figure that's only got 6 points. You need to be very careful about that sort of thing. Second line's up and down. If you're going upwards, it's easy to draw the first line too long and then not have enough energy for the second one. But more particularly, more obviously, on the line down, it's a stall turn or a humpty or whatever, the tendency is to fly the first line a bit long to pick up speed so the roll goes well, and then do the roll, and then find, firstly, that it's difficult to look at the ground because you rush towards you, and secondly, it's quite mentally tough to draw the second line as long as the first one. So draw the first line shorter. We're not worried about how slow the roll is. If it's a bit slow, it doesn't matter, but put the roll in the middle of the line and don't let it get ground rush is, I'm afraid, something that 50 million years of human development won't let you get away from. Positioning, let's talk for a moment about position. It's kind of a byproduct of everything that we talked about so far. The judge's view is that they want to see the sequence generally in front of them, not too near, not too far away, not too far to the left and not too far to the right. And the judging rules talk about the optimum location for each figure. So that doesn't mean to say they all have to be in the middle of the box, but it does mean to say that what you need to present to the judges is kind of a picture that fills the box from near left to near right, and is not so far away you can't see the airplane, and so near you're worried about the picture because you're nearly underneath it. And so we run this thing called the near, far, left, right system. And if the judge thinks that you're getting a bit left or a bit left, too far left, we'll write L or LL on the sheet. Each of those remarks is a downgrade of half a point. And it's quite easy if somebody flies around too far to each side, goes downwind too much, or flies too far away in the crossbox. It's quite easy to end up with quite a lot of those figures. We brought this system in quite a long time ago, and I remember horribly clearly that at the first event, the icicle up in Yorkshire somewhere, can't remember where, one of the first pilots to fly flew in a very heavy wind, and I was genuinely able to end up with a 0 mark for his position, which upset him quite a lot, I have to say. But he flew a lot downwind and a lot too far away. And this system leads the marks to be in that sort of style. So let's just go back to that for a second. Positioning is the last thing that I'm going to talk about for pilots. It's the last thing on your list, and it'll come naturally to you if you get the rest of it right. But that's the way we work it. Okay, let me talk about judges, those horrible people on the ground that only give downgrades. So it's quite a job to learn all the rules to be a judge. It's good fun. I've had an enormous amount of enjoyment judging at the British events and in all sorts of foreign places, as far as China, I might add. So we've been a long way with all this stuff. The top picture on the left is at Sherburn. not sure, the consonant people. And the bottom picture is in Poland somewhere, which I know Leif will remember with a big smile on his face. Lovely place. Judges are there to give an opinion. This is a very subjective sport, and what you get from the judge all the time is his opinion or her opinion on how each performance is flown, and they have to refer all the time to quite a complicated set of rules. And if you think learning the sequence is difficult, then learning all of the rules is quite a job too. So the judge sits there and looks at your flying, and hopefully he sits there in a calm manner and you don't give him any questions to think about. And if you don't, then you'll end up after each speaker with the judge going, oh, that wasn't bad. And it'll be 9.5 or something like that. But as soon as you start to present questions to the judge, then they have to start thinking. So whatever they think is incorrect or doesn't quite meet the standard that they're looking for gives them something to downgrade. And the downgrades, as you well know, are added up, accumulated for each figure, and the total of them is deducted from the 10 that you started with the instant that the figure began. And that's the mark you get at the end of the figure. So that silly looking graphic there is all about all the way from a smiling 10 to a horrible nothing very much, or maybe even a hard 0. So if you do something that's really awful, then you might either end up with no marks or you'll get a 0 of some kind. And as we just looked at, finally there's an oval mark to reflect how well the figures are placed within the performance zone, the optimum positions, and the judge would do that during the sequence by saying left and right and so on to the assistant. And then after the sequence, they add up all the letters, and there's a little bit of leeway, but they take that away from 10 as well, half a mark per letter. So the really important point here is that it's an opinion all the time. And I have to tell you, if you haven't done it, even if you can't imagine it, but assessing every detail of the flight path and attitude of an airplane, which can be near or far away, through 7 for 6 or 7 for club, up to 12 or 14 figures for advanced and unlimited. Each figure with 20, 30, 40, 50 things to judge. It's almost completely done by what psychologists call pattern matching. In other words, the judge expects you to do something and then watches you do it. And if you do it about right, then you're not asking any questions. But if you don't do it about right, if you do something that's strange and unexpected, then the judge has to get out of what we call fast thinking mode. That's just kind of pattern recognition. And has to think about what you've done. And for the judge, poor person, for the judge, hopping between pattern matching fast thinking and going into slow thinking to answer a question is quite a clumsy thing to do. If you look around online, there's a whole lot of stuff about fast thinking and slow thinking. And you might think it has nothing to do with aerobatic, but actually it's quite important. It probably matters for you in the airplane as well, because you haven't got much time for slow thinking in the airplane. You're a fast thinker from start to finish. So try to give the judge what they expect to see, and then you'll get better marks. Only when you deviate from what they expect to see do you start to run into downgrades. Now, after the sequence is over, there's then quite a lot of urgency on the judging mind to look back to the sheet, make sure the assistant has written everything down properly, look at the positioning mark, add up the letters, sort that out, make sure it's signed, somebody will come in and collect it and so on. So we haven't got much time on the judging mind to do anything then, and we certainly haven't got much time to go back to each figure. So, oh, figure 5 didn't quite get that right, and maybe we should have done this. There isn't time to do that sort of thing. It's done, and we're on to the next figure. Now, I did this because I thought it was quite amusing. Maybe it's not terribly representative to all of you, but there's a figure that was in the WAC 2017 unknown sequences came from the Americans, bless them. It was 64K, and there's quite a lot going on there. Opposite rolls on the vertical, negative stuff on the top, and opposite rolls at the end. You can't really read this lot through, but I wanted to try and lay out what I would look at in that figure if I was judging it. And I'd like to think that that kind of flitted through my mind on the way. But there are about 35 places in that figure where you can downgrade. And that's not uncommon. So figures that are less K than that obviously have less opportunities for a judge to get nasty with you. But nevertheless, there's a lot to think about. That figure would take about 20 seconds to fly from start to finish. And so if there are 35 things to look at, that's almost 2 decisions per second throughout for the judge to get on top of it. So you shouldn't be surprised if they don't get it all right, because they won't, and they won't think of everything. But that's kind of what goes on the judging line in that sort of figure. If you give the judge questions, then we end up like this. Typically, at every break in an international competition, we end up round in a circle. Luckily, we have somebody who makes a video for us, so we have all that sort of thing going on. And we look at a video, but we'll every time there's a hard zero, we'll end up looking through the pilot sheets and looking at the video to convince ourselves that we've done the right thing. We check every one. But a domestic competition, there's not so much time to do that. But nevertheless, questions are not what you need to be doing. Give them answers. And learning to judge isn't difficult. I'd strongly urge all of you who are flying airplanes in competitions to take a bit of time and come down the judging line and look at what goes on. You will be astonished at how easy it is to see the errors, and you will be horrified at how costly they are. And if you come down and do a bit of work on the judging line, you will go back, and when you next get into your airplane, you will have a different view. So take that as kind of good advice. Now, we've been going through this for 50 minutes, and I don't really want to wear you all out, but what I'd like to do now is go quickly through a piece of information that I've got here. So stop sharing that, and I'm going to, where is that? I'm going to share that and put that up on the screen. Hopefully you can all see that. Say yes.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So this is what we go through at the judging schools. There's quite a lot here, and I'm not going to go through in detail because there is a lot of detail. But just so you've had a quick run through, center of gravity track. That's the thing that we talk about largely for the horizontal lines that the aeroplane flies in the air and looping figures. We have, if you think of the airplane as a dot, then it's the dot going through the sky that is the center of gravity track. It doesn't mean to say that the airplane is pointing in that direction. It does mean to say that that's the blob, it's the smoke trail, if you like, in still air. The other thing we look at is the zero lift axis. And what that means is that if you got a bit of height and then pointed the airplane exactly straight downwards at 90 degrees, so you were flying a vertical line, so the smoke trail in still air was vertical, then the axis of the airplane is the zero lift axis pointing straight at the ground. So those two things are what we use all the time in judging to check what you're all doing. And they're used in different places at different times. The square loop on the left is center of gravity track for the horizontals, zero lift axis for the verticals, center of gravity track line along the top, and so on. Figures of 8 are much more difficult, a lot more going on in different places. And the pits on the right-hand side that you can see, or in the center that you can see, center of gravity track at the bottom, center of gravity track around the arc to get to the vertical, and then we're in zero lift axis. There's a combination of center of gravity track and zero lift axis whilst the roll's going on, and then we're into axis and then back to track for the arc and the line at the top as well. You can see that at the top the airplane's nose is pointing up, so the zero lift axis is quite positive, but the center of gravity track needs to be horizontal. We need to tell you what we don't like about what you're doing in easy words. So bad attitudes. Steep is nearer the vertical, shallow is nearer the horizontal in 45s. And in verticals, we talk about positives and negatives, positive up, negative down, and so on, so that we can explain to you what we think you've done. That, of course, the positive and negative up and down is about the zero lift axis, and so are the 45s. These are all the axis of the airplane. Box performance zone we looked at in the previous thing. I'm not going to go through that very much. You all know what a box is. There's the main axis, cross axis, the B axis, and the judges sit one side and they nastily give you downgrades. Wing rocks, we've talked about, particularly from the point of view of practice. You need to do them to start the figure, and please, if you break, we need to see them when you break. If you're a glider pilot, then ignore a lot of this. You need to do wing rocks to start with, but after that, glider judges get on with what you're doing. But please, please, please use your wing rocks as a bit of practice. They really can help you to get your head around what's coming. Line lengths and so on. A vertical there would be track, and then zero lift axis. A little bit of track and then zero lift axis in the vertical, and so on. The corners, arcs, I've talked about already. They need to be constant arc. They don't need to be the same size very often, except in looping figures, square loops and eight-sided loops, where the radiuses do need to be the same size. Radii do need to be the same size. Mostly radii don't. They can be different sizes, but they need to be radii, not funny shapes like I showed you before. And judges are there to mark faults. They're only there to see your downgrades, so don't give them those funny questions, only give them the answer. Turns. You all learned how to do turns in PPLs and then throw all that good advice away when you get to competitions. Roll, pull, and then roll back straight again. It's at least 60 degrees for powered airplanes, exactly 60 degrees for gliders. There's no wind correction. If you're clever, you can use a turn to get to quite a better place in the box. So hopefully you practice that one. Slow rolls. We've talked about the 2 or 4 thing, and that diagram there shows the 2 or 4 the way I would love to see it from the ground, with the nose pointing in the right direction all the time. No downgrades. Flick rolls, difficult to judge because they happen quickly. We want to see the abrupt pitch in yaw to start with, and then we need to see the tail waggle round so that we're convinced that the rudder's been applied all the way around and the flick completes right at the end. What we don't want to see is a bit of pitch in yaw and then an aileron roll. It's quite easy to see from the ground. We run those at judging schools, and it's quite interesting. Spins. Don't think of the spin as having a vertical line until you've stopped it. All the time the airplane is spinning, it's still moving forwards. But there we want to see a proper stall, please. You need to see the nose go right up and then the airplane stall, wing drop, nose drop, and the start of the rotation all at the same time. And then we need to see the rotation stop and a clean vertical afterwards. And there's a radius at the bottom. Don't draw a long line for no reason. There's radius you need to apply carefully. This is the diagram we use for explaining how judges should judge the loops. If you look at the diagram on the left, you can see that it's the first quarter of the loop that gives the judge, as it were, the template, the yardstick to judge the rest of the loop. And then second, third, and fourth quarters have all got to be the same shape and size, and the airplane needs to end up at the right place. We tell judges, they don't always do it, but we tell judges to put a pencil or a pen or their finger up underneath where the airplane starts and try and hold it still. Then you can check that the airplane's ended up the same height or higher or lower. And all those horrible diagrams on the right-hand side are what we see from time to time with different shapes and so on. And they all have different downgrades. Half loops with rolls. This all changed a few years ago. It used to be quite difficult to judge these, particularly if the pilot flew a roll and then flew any sort of a line before doing the half loop, or from the top through the half loop down and then through a line before the roll. You need to see the roll exactly attached to the start or the end of the half loop, otherwise there's a downgrade. If the judge sees any line at all, it's 1 point. If there's a bit more of a line, it's 2. And if there's quite a bit of line, it's 3 points downgrade. And if we think that the roll is at a distance from the half loop, same as the radial, more than the radius of the half loop, and that's not difficult, then it's a PZ, the perception theorem. Stall turns, simple enough. They always look very good from inside the airplane, unless you're applying the pips and it rolls, which is one of those things. So within one wingspan is correct. You need to fly at the top of the stall turn as absolutely slowly as you can be, and then stamp on the rudder pedal to make sure that it's the tightest turn that you can manage. But if the airplane arcs by 1 wingspan, it's 1 point downgrade. 2 wingspans, it's 2 points. And you can't see that from inside the airplane, so it's all a great surprise when you look at your judging pen. Humpties, lots of different sorts. I can't remember how many, but verticals, 45s, up and down, all over the place. Lots and lots and lots of humpties. And they all have the same characteristic. They start and the finish radius do not need to be the same, and they don't need to be the same as the radius at the top either. So the radius, as you can see, they're radii A, D, and E. They can all be different, doesn't matter, but they do need to be radii. So constant radii. Smooth, please be smooth. Tail slides, fairly straightforward. Radius in, radius out, needs to be a good vertical. Almost impossible to fly a tail slide and make sure that it falls the right way without cheating at the top. So if it's going to be canopy up, you're going to be putting a bit of forward stick in just as you get to the top, and then putting the stick right back to make it fall the right way. So from a judge's standpoint, there's almost always that 5 degree at the top, and it works both ways, I regret to tell you. So if you put a little bit of 5 degree cheat in as you get to the top and then fall with it, you can get downgraded both ways. So most tail slides never ever get more than 8 out of 10. And of course, some of them are a lot worse. Rolling turns. Everybody loves rolling turns, don't they? They never ever look like that lovely diagram. They're quite hard to fly. The rules now are that, for instance, for that 2-in roller, we need to see the aeroplane at all of the intermediate points, which are 1/8 of a circle. We need, in this particular figure, we need to see them wings vertical and wings horizontal at exactly those points. It's quite hard to judge from the ground because it's difficult to tell where the 1/8 circle points are, but making sure that the wings are level halfway around and then level at the end is possibly the best you can do. And you will need pilots, you need a lot of rudder to make them look like that. You cannot fly a rolling turn without doing horrible things with the rudder pedals, particularly at the end. So remember what that looks like, and now look at this. This is what most of them turn out like in the end. A little bit of roll and a pull and so on. And so if you could put a firecracker on your airplane and they smoke behind it, you would see something like that. And even if you get the axis right, so the zero left axis of the aeroplane is pointing in the correct direction at the end, you will almost certainly be skidding maybe 10 or 15 degrees, quite a lot. It's not very easy to see from the judge's point of view. Tend to concentrate on the direction of the aeroplane rather than the track, because it's quite hard to tell what the track is. So whatever you do, use the rudder, use it a lot. Positioning, talked about left, left, right, right, all that sort of thing. So there you go, you know all about that. Major errors. Now, figures where there are lots and lots of downgrades, when you get to 10, of course, the figure's got nothing left. So it's a zero. It's a numeric zero, which we write as 0.0. And if the cumulative errors in a figure, if you think back to that awful American figure back last year, or in 17, if you think of all the errors that can accumulate, then if they get to more than 45 degrees of error, less than 90, then it's going to be numeric zero. And think of flip was too. They end up with a perception zero if the judge thinks we haven't flicked properly. But all those things in green at the top, we can't use the video for them. They're all subjective, they're personal judgment. And what the judge ends up with on the paper is, I'm afraid, pretty much what you're stuck with. However, if the errors get to more than 90 degrees, or we see something that's actually wrong in the figure, then it's a hard zero. And domestically, we all gather together after the sequence and try and convince ourselves that we made the right decision. Internationally, we go back and look at the video, and the pilot gets the benefit of the doubt. So those are the two major areas that judges work in. And here we are, finished. We asked lots of questions at the end of the judging school, and they were lazy people sitting on the ground at the bottom. That was one of the club events at Little Gransden, one lovely day. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to move back to my PowerPoint, wherever it is. Now I need, come back to the PowerPoint. I need to share screen, back to my PowerPoint. There we go. Right, so now I've had a look around the rules. Finishing now. Pilots, don't fly low. Please don't. Apart from frightening everybody on the judging line and giving them lots of questions that they don't judge you at all, just don't get near the low line. It's not worth it. People who think that they can excuse me, get down to the low line and impress the judges by flying lovely figures right in their faces, you're wrong. You need to be a little bit further up to give the judges a quiet time and let them get on with marking your figures. If you have a problem with your marks, don't get clever with the rules. The rules are the same for everyone. Don't show off. We hate people who do Zoom climbs and that sort of thing. If you have a problem with your marking sheet, go and read the rules. And before you part with any money, we don't do money at British events, don't think. Steve, you have to put right on that. But go and ask for advice. Go and ask the contest director, and if you really have to, ask the chief judge for advice, and get the opinion of your colleagues before you step out of your quiet and careful pram and start to wave your racket around. Be factual, don't be emotive. Oh, here we go. Judges, they've done a lot of hard work when you get to the end of a competition. At the internationals, there's a frightening number of things that we've judged, so we're all, we've enjoyed it, but we're all quite tired at the end of the day. Don't expect judges to favour their friends. We run this funny thing called fair play all the time, which should take me a week to explain carefully. But basically what it does is to track out bias in the judges' marks and show them what they've done, show them the error of their ways, and give the pilots a fair set of marks. So maybe that's another discussion for much later on. I'm at the end. So I'm going to